no, there is an echo. Okay. Yeah, welcome to our panel. I think it's the first panel here at AdventureX. It will be about branching storylines and decision making in adventure games and in games in general. And yeah, we have 3 people here and me. I'm going to lead the conversation here, and I'm going to introduce who's going to talk about the topic here. This is John Ingold. I think a lot of you probably already saw him earlier today. He is an interactive fiction writer, and he was multiple times nominated for Best Writing for the ZZY Awards. And he's been writing since 1999. He's the co-founder of Ingold, and they just released a game called 80 Days for Apple, mobile platforms. And Time Magazine actually says that it's one of the best games of the year. Sorry? It's the best. It is the best game, 2014, I think in any genre, right? Yeah. And yeah, and if you don't have an Apple device, you can buy it for Android around Christmas time. 80 days. So, hi John. Then we got Dave Gilbert here. I'm not sure if I have to introduce Dave Gilbert. He's the founder of Budget Eye Games. Since 2001, you've been making games. Yeah. And he's a publisher and a developer at the same time, so he knows both sides of the coin. And yeah, he's mostly famous for the Blackwell games. And he just released a game as a publisher called The Golden Wake. And this is our next guest here.
Good segue, I like segues.
Yes. He likes segues. Francisco Gonzalez.
He likes segues.
And he's a very active figure also, like Dave Gilbert, in the Adventure Game Studio community. He has a podcast together with Ben Chandler called the Blue Cup Tools Podcast, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And you can probably, can you get it on iTunes
Yes,
or something?
you can get it
Okay.
on iTunes, yeah.
So, and they're talking a lot about games and what's actually happening in gaming culture right now. And I am Kevin Mentz. I'm a writer and game designer for Daedalic Entertainment. I wrote a game called Memoria. I don't know if anyone here played Memoria. I gave a talk earlier about that. And I'm currently working on a game called The Devil's Man. And The Devil's Man is my first foray into the whole field of branching narrative and storyline. So this whole thing, talking about this, is very important for me because this is something that just constantly defines what I'm working on right now. And I guess probably there are a lot of people here right now who could also sit here, so this is more of an active forum. I'm going to ask questions. You can, whenever you want, you can ask a question or you can give an answer. I want this to be a very dynamic, lively discussion if we can have that dynamic. Okay, so I want to start with you, John. You've been writing interactive fiction for a while. And I would claim that at the heart of interactive fiction, there's probably the reader or the player making decisions in those texts. So you've been dealing with those things for a long time now. How to branch storylines and to make the player part of the development of the story. So my question now is, my first question, later on I want to ask more about how you do this, but right now I'm interested how you are actually viewing this hype currently around branching storyline as it is happening in different genres and different games. Are you playing games with branching storylines?
Yeah, so I guess the Walking Dead is kind of the one that really...
or Heavy Rain.
Yeah, heavy. Funny how the Walking Dead really captured people's imaginations, even though it is just Heavy Rain again. In a sense, they didn't really change anything. And I suppose Dragon Age is kind of running wild at the moment. So it's a funny thing. I've been working in text adventures when I was an indie guy, and working with Ingold. It's still a reasonably niche sort of thing. It's sort of interactive fiction on mobile devices. That's a relatively under-publicized area. And what you can do in a text-based environment is you have very, very few limitations on what you can do in terms of branching and adaptation of the content. So I am something of an academic snob when it comes to branching narrative. I've been doing this for too long not to be really, but when I see something like the Telltale games, firstly, they are structurally really obvious how they're working, and secondly, they don't really do very much. So it's a bit like having read lots of Shakespeare and then going and seeing a play written by a 17-year-old. You go, I can see what you're doing there, but you have got so far yet to go before you're really pushing anything that looks like a boundary. And that sounds incredibly arrogant, and well, it is incredibly arrogant, because what Telltale have done is they've employed just enough branching to a rich 3D, well-written, well-voice-acted, high production values, well-known franchise. And that's their success, is that they've taken a franchise people have a relationship with, made it just branch enough that people can get involved with it, hidden enough of their adventure game roots that they can make it popular in the mainstream, because they have done that. They've definitely hidden the adventure game mechanics as much as they can, and made a product which looks successful. But I think the branching is not actually at the heart of the Walking Dead project. It's something that they sort of did because maybe they thought they could, and it seemed to work quite well, and now they're pursuing that with interest. But I don't think they sit down and go, we're going to make this thing really work. We want branching to be really important. What makes branching work? How do we make it integral to this project? I think they're doing that more and more, but I think to start with, that's not where they started from. So I am interested because if they ever get really good at branching, then my company's fucked, because our thing that we do is we do loads and loads and loads of branching in really complicated ways. And if they get good at that, they've got way better production values than we do. And so we do. But I think actually the thing that they're doing is they're publicising this idea of branching narrative, which looks a lot like the kind of branches that you got in game books of the 80s. They're sort of quite binary choices, they're quite explicit choices, it's quite clear what they do. And I think the most interesting space for branching narrative is when it becomes so fine-grained, it isn't really branching narrative, it's more like a simulated drama, which I think is what we are sort of aiming towards. So I think a lot of the branching games I see at the moment, they're interesting, they're doing some things very well, they've got very, very good writers. But from a structural point of view, I think we can do so much better, and I think there are lots of people already doing much, much more interesting work just in fields which have a bit less gloss.
But that's very interesting that you say that the games actually have to, they have to relive the development that interactive fiction or the 80s branches on Knights did, had to do. And would you say, I'm sorry, I just lost. Okay. Are you actually aware that there are tendencies in the more mainstream gaming sphere where the people look into interactive fiction for inspiration on how to structure their games, or is it just like, we're here and this is there an awareness?
So I don't think there's much of an awareness of interactive fiction as in the text game world. Well, I worked at PlayStation for a few years and no one had ever played any text games at all. In terms of branching narrative though, I think when I was there, which was about 10 years ago I joined now, every single project you did, they would say, do we want this to be branching? Could we make it branching? How could we make it branching? Let's make it branching. And then what would happen was people would go, what are the production costs of that? Oh, we're going to make 3 versions of this scene and players will only see 1. Right, we're not going to do that. And that conversation happened on every single project repeatedly, and it was always the same. It's the same argument that they use against having male and female avatars in games. It's they go, well, that's a binary choice. We don't deem it necessary. We're not going to do it. And so I think one of the things Telltale did actually was they decided to do it anyway, which is actually quite brave in context. And you see a tiny bit of branching. I mean, obviously Heavy Rain did quite a bit, but that was their shtick. You see a few games with kind of a choice at the end. But I think they're definitely aware of it, but I think they're not necessarily very interested in it, though I think actually the success of The Walking Dead means I'm sure people in Naughty Dog and studios like that are having conversations about branching narrative every week. Whether they do anything about it or not is a much more financial question than an artistic one, but yeah.
Are you having discussions about
you having discussions about branching narrative at Project Game?
Honestly, not really. Excuse me. My view on that is, I always feel, I mean, Telltale does something very clever where it's more like mini little branches that go out and then come back and then continues on with the story. I'm moving my hands a lot, I don't want you to still hear me on the microphone. The ending is typically pretty much the same no matter what you do. It's just the value that they give you is that you are playing it your way, you're reacting the way you want to. You know, you choose who to give food to and so on. And it is very obvious what they're doing. But at the same time, it's so nicely written and these characters are so nicely drawn that you buy into it because they're inviting you to make your own choices within this world and with these characters that you supposedly, if they did their job right, have emotional investment in. So that's a really clever thing they did. Me, on the other hand, I always feel that like whenever I think about doing a branching choice, it's there is always inevitably, you know, being a writer type who has a very specific vision, and then the whole thing is kind of my own story. I have my own very clear idea of how the story really goes. So there's my ending, and there's my canon choice in my head, and then there could be this other one. Yeah, it could go this way, but that's not really the way I want it to go. And I see that often in a lot of games with multiple choices. How there's the ending and there's the choice that's obviously the canon one, the one they really wanted, and then there's the one they threw in because yay, multiple choices. That's what we're supposed to have. So I'm kind of torn on the subject. I think if you're going to have it, it's got to be really ingrained from the beginning. And the great thing about your games, for the most part, is that the story is pretty much created while you play. You don't really there is no canon story. It kind of shapes itself as you play. So like the narrative is very divorced from the gameplay. So you can do all sorts of awesome things with it. But for a very heavy narrative-based game like Telltale games or like my games, it's a lot more difficult, and often I'm not sure it's necessary. The Telltale stuff I think works really well because, like I said, I'm invested in certain characters than others. Like I really liked X, but another character might really hate X, and another player might really hate X. So we can side with two different people, and it's sort of, you know, for a couple of games, those choices play out, and then they branch back, and then it continues on the way it's supposed to. And, it is very superficial, but it works in its way.
And Francisco?
Well,
Another question.
okay.
What I'm interested in, first, before I go into your games, before I want to know how much you think about branching storylines, I want to go, you in your podcast, you talk a lot about these things, right? So you play a lot of games with branching narrative. And so how would you think that, this is very interesting, I think people get more and more aware of the limits of branching narratives and story in game design, and storytelling in game design. And how would you say that this discussion, because you are actually also part of the discussion in the podcast, how would you say this changed during the last few years? How would you say that branching storylines, how's your personal view on the limits of branching storylines?
Well, I think it's interesting as far as the Telltale approach in that I think, if I'm not mistaken, Telltale was the first company that incorporated the branching system into episodic games. I mean, because when you have single experience games like Heavy Rain, which are branching, but I mean, I think the idea that David Cage said at least was that he wanted you to play Heavy Rain once and only once, and your story was your story. But I question that because most people, especially in a system like Heavy Rain, where you get trophies, and the trophies are story-based and dependent on what choice you made. For people who are into getting achievements or whatever, you're going to want to go back and see what other options there are. So that kind of gets diluted in that sense. But to get back on topic, just it was interesting to me the way Telltale did it because, I mean, I kind of played around with the idea of branching story when I was doing the Ben Jordan series. Like, in case 3, I had 2 different endings, the good ending and the not so good ending. But it becomes difficult because then you have to wonder, well, which of these endings is canon? I'm doing an episodic series. I have to build on one of these endings. So, I mean, with Telltale, at least, that you can track the choices that were made and stuff, you kind of push the story where you're going in that direction. But, I mean, it just seems like now that's the trend. Like, even Dreamfall Chapters, I haven't played that yet, but from what I've seen, it's like they're really putting an emphasis on all the choices you make, to the point where it's like, there's a bit where you have to decide whether to order cheese soup or sausages or something, and it's like, this will affect the story. It's like, okay, we'll have indigestion later.
That made me really interested.
Yeah, I
want to
mean,
know where that's going.
where is that going? It's like, oh, there's a guy knocking at the door, but he can't come save me because he's in the bathroom with diarrhea because I got the sausage instead of the cheese soup or whatever. I mean, I don't know, it might work. But, yeah, I mean, it just seems like branching is the new hip thing, which I'm not opposed to, but like you say, it's difficult to do well. And John, I'm sorry to say I'm not familiar with your work, but I mean, I'm interested as far as what you said, like the biggest hurdle financially and the production costs, especially as an indie, is, you know, you're thinking you're ambitious and you want to say, okay, well, I want my game to be immersive and have these branching storylines, but if I have to spend the time and the money on these assets that, you know, potentially 50% of players are never going to see, is it worth it in the long run? I mean, in your games, how much of that is required, like as far as asset wise?
So, yeah, so I think I reflect what Dave said, that it really has to be ingrained in your design from the beginning. I'm not a fan of the concept of the multiple ending or the kind of minor branching for the sake of it, because I think what happens from a player's point of view is if you hit this choice, it feels quite arbitrary. Often you kind of go, well, here are these 2 games, I don't know, which one is the right one? You tell me, I don't have any information, I don't care. And that's really not what we do. Our gameplay is entirely the making of choices. So the idea is you read a chunk of text, maybe like a paragraph, and then you make a choice, usually from 3. And like our playthrough of Sorcery, you probably make about 2,000 choices. And they're all saved over into part 2, and so on and so forth. And that's the DNA of the game, that's the structure of the game. So it kind of changes the conversation quite a lot. Are all the choices significant? No, definitely, absolutely not. Sometimes it's really just look at this thing, look at that thing, walk on, spend some time, say hello to the guy, don't say hello to the guy. It's not a branch, it's just which bit are you looking at. It's like pen, point and click. What are you going to click in what order? When are you going to get bored and move on? You're going to bother reading the description of the doors, or you're just going to move on. That's just the language with which we do that, is the branching language. But then there may be choices as well, but I guess most of it actually is little choices that have minor stat changes which build up. So we tend to track character variables, we track what kind of choices you've made, we make an assessment of what character you like, and then that's relevant next one. In terms of the asset questions you actually asked, because it's built into our DNA from the start, we don't think of it as redundancy exactly, but it is redundancy. So 80 Days has a text script of 500,000 words. An average successful playthrough of the game, you'll see about 3% of that. But it's designed to be replayable. The whole idea is you go one way around the world, and you go another way around the world, and you talk to someone else, and they go, well, you went to Africa, I went to Russia. That is the gameplay. So we couldn't do it without that redundancy, I think. If we were to try and move that into a graphical environment, we wouldn't end up making games that look like your guys' games. I think we'd have to find a solution where we could box it up a little bit, have standard animations for things, have standard facial expressions, have a sort of more of a kit part approach. But I strongly suspect that's what BioWare do, looking at the way Dragon Age does its conversations. I'm sure they have kit animations they drag in, they don't animate every cutscene by hand, it's much more dynamically generated. And that's the kind of solution I think we use. So you lose a bit of that handcrafted nature, but then the bits of the story that are important or that everybody sees, the beginning, the end, the tutorial, then you go in and handcraft those. So I think for me, it's just it's not, like I said before, it's not really branching narrative that we're aiming to create. It's more a game in which the player's verbs are always interesting story actions. And actually that description is probably exactly what you would say about your own games as well. It's just a question of how many times do you funnel the player or let them carry on in a different way. And it doesn't matter particularly whether that affects the long-term plot so long as the player's moving forward. Basically, we just don't want people to get stuck. That's our one thing. We try to avoid puzzles, I think. So we have to replace it.
that's very interesting. That I think, as we said, that there is this hype that people think, okay, if I have branching storylines, then things will get interesting. But in my opinion, I think that's a very good point to talk about.
Mark, one more cup, please.
It's all right. You guys can use the bottle. Sure. Only Englishmen.
Actually, it's more about meaningful gameplay. That meaningful action. So the player has to perform meaningful action. I think that's more important than just having a decision-making thing just because you want a decision-making thing in there. But I think that there is this belief that if you offer the decision to the player, if the player can decide, then there's a good chance that there will be this will be meaningful if it is a meaningful decision. But that can turn as just a regular action that the player has to do. Like, for example, that's a stupid example. I have to walk through a door. It's more, I think people think it's more, it's more meaningful if I have two doors that I can walk through than I have only one door. And so what, that's another binary choice. So you would say that if I have those two doors, that what could I do to make those doors interesting? How can I make them meaningful? This is just a binary choice, and it's not very meaningful
I
at all.
assume by two doors you're speaking metaphorically.
Yeah, of
Two
course.
choices.
Yeah, story A, door B.
It really kind of, it's all about build-up and storytelling and how you present those choices. One thing about, to bring back Telltale as an example, I can't think of any particular one situation, but there have been moments where it's like, you know, they've built up certain characters, you have emotional investment with certain characters in certain situations, and suddenly you got to make the choice. Do you say this person or this person? It's like, well, I like them both. And it's not, I mean, usually the lazy way of doing it is like, oh, there's the good choice and the bad choice. But when there are two good choices or two bad choices and there's no third option, and then that moment when you're kind of paralyzed, like, what do I do, what do I do? Making that choice actually has meaning at that point. You're like dooming someone you like to die, or you know, you're saving someone you like, or something like that. So when you're given a choice like that, it's got to have some meaning behind it. You have to earn that choice. Whatever choice you make, you have to. I mean, it's got to have some emotional resonance. It's got to evoke something. Otherwise, you're just choosing an option to make the game go on. But if it actually has meaning to you, then it can affect you and it can be very powerful. As superficial as it may be.
So I kind of disagree with almost all of that, actually.
You may.
Like, when I encounter one of those choices in Telltale, because as an audience member, I don't want to make the choice between, say, X and Y. What I find myself doing is disentangling myself from the game. I say, I don't like either of those choices. Where's the third option? In real life, I'm not going to shoot that guy or shoot that guy. I'm going to put the gun down and try something else. I'm going to improvise. And I get frustrated by the way the game has put me in a situation which is callously and deliberately unpleasant. And I don't think that's the most interesting choice we can put in the game. I mean, you can make it work, it can be okay, but the much more interesting model of choice for me is the choice that you get during a game of blackjack. So you all know blackjack, you get two cards, they add up to 11. You go, oh, I'll have another card, twist, they add up to 14. You go, oh, I'll have another card, they add up to 17. You go, oh shit. That's the interesting choice. That's the interesting one, where I've taken a series of 3 choices and they've escalated my risk. And I'm now in a situation which is entirely my own fault. I got there, I did everything, but I'm also more invested in it than I was before. That's got meaning for me. It's not a very serious outcome. If I lose the hand, I lose the hand. The meaning has been generated from the fact that I just invested 3 clicks in it. And that's what we do all the time in Sorcery. Sorcery is a game about traps, essentially. So pretty much every scene in Sorcery is, you approach the well, oh, it looks like there's a voice in the well singing a song saying, throw a gold piece in the well. So you throw a gold piece in the well, and the voice says, oh, if you give me just one more, I'll really help you. So you give it one more. And it says, oh, if you give me just one more, I'll grant all your wishes. So you give it one more. If you give me one more, then I'll do... And after a while you go, hang on, is this on loop? I've just chucked 5 gold pieces down as well. Do I chuck a 6? Or do I walk away? And those are the options we give you. Add another gold piece to the pile of gold pieces you've already thrown within, or walk away. There is no third option. And it's brutal. It's a brutal choice. It's a real fuck you of a choice. But does it matter? Of course it doesn't matter. It's 6 gold pieces. So we get people to create the meaning and the tension in the moment, but without having to have massively complicated, long-term consequences. So the experience is in the choice. And, you know, that's what you do in theatre. If you write a play, every dramatic moment is not one person killing another. It's someone getting angry with someone, or having a falling out, or a slight misunderstanding. But those moments are dull in the hands of a 17-year-old playwright because they can't manage tension. But if you put that in the hands of Shakespeare, every moment is gripping because he's good at what he does. And so our aspiration really is to use the language of choices to create moment-by-moment tension without the need for this massively overwrought 24-style series of massive choices that change everything, that are really dramatic because they're exhausting. And then, in that structure, when you finally do have a significant choice, you've done all of these choices up to date, you've already in the tension, I believe we can make that 100 times more significant. So when you get to a point in 80 days, which has thousands and thousands of choices in it, where Fog might actually die on the basis of your choice, I think that will be more significant to people because we've already taught you a language of tension. And that's what I mean by, this is not about branching narrative, it's not about choosing what happens next, it's about existing in the moment with every player action being a meaningful thing. And okay, that's a really hard goal. That is a really hard goal. It sounds, I imagine most of you listening to it going, yeah, but you can't actually do that, can you?
Well, you did.
Well, I'd like to think we tried, or we got close to it, but that's the goal. I think that's why this is an interesting topic. And so, in that sense, I don't think Telltale are actually playing the same design game that we're playing. I don't think that is their goal. I don't think they would recognise that description. Or actually, I think they would because they're clever people, but that, I think we can do far better than how do I make the choice of doors interesting. I think that example is almost, it's so the wrong question. But we've stuck in it because this is the language of choice-based games and has been for a long time. But I think it's kind of primitive, actually, and I want us to do that.
I mean, I can say a little something about Telltale that's interesting, not to criticize poor Telltale, because I do enjoy Telltale games, but Telltale has done, it's interesting because they've done both sides of the coin. I mean, now they're focusing on, you know, your choices, even though they essentially boil down to being black and white choices, and a lot of people complain that it's just the illusion of choice, because it doesn't matter that you saved, you know, X or Y in episode 1, because in episode 3, whoever you save is going to die anyway out of your control, so it renders the choice meaningless, etc., etc.
It's a zombie apocalypse. They're all going to die.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
The thing to do in a zombie apocalypse is commit suicide. Obviously.
Yeah,
Why would
exactly.
anyone
Which
do
is,
anything?
why do people, oh, that's a whole other topic. Why do people still like The Walking Dead? I don't know. Anyway, it's so weird. But anyway, but Telltale also did a thing that they got a lot of flack for in Tales of Monkey Island, mostly in episode 1, which you had the dialogue options and you had, you know, the little jokes like, you know, it's like, oh, tell me about, or someone mentions deep gut, and it's like, oh, I didn't know Elaine's mother-in-law was in town, or whatever. And you have these jokes, which Monkey Island is famous for, and no matter which one you click, you just get a generic response from Guybrush, like, tell me more, or whatever. So you think you have these choices, and then you click the dialogue, and you just get the same one regardless of which one, which is a cheat, But yeah, I mean, the illusion of choice is a really easy trap to fall into. I'm very much guilty of that. But it's definitely, I mean, I see it more from the point of, if you have a conversation between two characters, I mean, in this plays to what you were talking about, if it's getting a little long-winded, but you need to have it be slightly longer because it's imparting some important information or whatever, it seems more interesting to me to break it up with your character having the ability to say something, to just have that interactivity there. Even if, no matter what you say, it ends up having the same effect, at least it kind of seems like, or it might not necessarily branch the narrative, or, I mean, if you want to be more ambitious, you could have it say, oh, well, if you say this, this character will then feel this way about you, or this way about you. But just that ability to not just sit there and listen to these characters have their little dialogue between themselves, because then you're just sitting there thinking, oh, okay, well, let me just click through this dialogue, to be able to be part of that conversation. Or, I mean, it's rare in adventure games, but like, if you're having a conversation, how often does the other character ask you a question about yourself that you can then choose? It was, I mean, I tried it a little bit maybe a little heavy-handed, but there's a bit in one of the Ben Jordan games too, where like there's a guy talking to you and asking you like, oh, what was your favorite adventure that you've had, or tell me about this, and by clicking through those things, you learn more about the character. I mean, you could kind of, just kind of shape the character as you play the game, or whatever. So, yeah,
I
there's that.
remember that scene very well. I think it was one of my favorite scenes, and it was in the
It
Sword
was
of the
in-
Sea People.
Yeah, it was in
Yeah, I
number
was
6.
totally blown away because I was used to ask questions. And then this guy came into this pub. I met him in the pub, and it was a totally different atmosphere. It was outside of the other narrative. I was just sitting in the pub and talking, and then this guy asked me questions. And that was so powerful in that moment. I really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it. I also remember in the first, I think, if I remember correctly, in the first Blackwell game, you had a little bit of role-playing-esque mechanic that you could say that when Rosangela Blackwell had to react to people, you could decide how she reacts to them emotionally. But you didn't have that in the later games anymore.
Yeah, well, wasn't so much how she would react emotionally.
It was a little heavy-handed. Like, do you want a anger response, or friendly response, or a sweet response? And it was kind of a little clever, too clever for its own good, because you didn't know how she was actually going to respond. It's like friendly response. She's Rosangela. She's incredibly awkward. She tries to say something friendly, and it comes out horribly. So that wasn't your intention when you clicked that choice. So that's why I stopped doing that, because it just wasn't working.
But did you try to, you could have also write the multiple choice lines, or find a way like Dragon Age does with these little icons, where you try to communicate more clearly to the player what kind of answer this is, and how she will really...
That's what I did later on. It's
I didn't, when I listed the choices, I didn't have like the full sentence of what she'd say, but the gist of it, so you know that you're not going to say something mean, or that you will say something mean if you want to, that kind of thing.
Is that something you could build on and try to...
Well, it's over now, so it's
Sorry, not my game.
it's done. For follow-up games, yes, again.
Well, you don't want to fall into the situation like L.A. Noire, where it's like truth, doubt, and lie, and you think, okay, well, I'm doubting him. He's like, you're a killer, I hate you! It's like, that's not how you shouldn't be able to do that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I stopped playing L.A. Noire when I was thrown out of my own interrogation booth by the guy I was interviewing. And I went back in, and the entire dialogue started from all...
That was the first one, right?
Yeah, it was the first that I stopped the game after the first game.
That weird thing where they gave you 3 choices and one of them was right and 2 of them were wrong. When
Yeah.
here's me attempting to do a sort of interesting psychological, and actually it's a quiz, and it's a crap quiz at that, because I have no idea what that computer face is supposed to be doing. Which was really odd, because it's a game that you're never going to replay, so they could have totally just had all 3 answers being correct, and I wouldn't have noticed. I just would have felt like a better detective.
They tell you when you got it wrong, which I thought was really,
That's just such a downer.
that was a bad design choice, because I don't want to know that I got it wrong. I want to reload and do it again.
Yeah, that's what I did. I just reloaded every single time to get the perfect interview. How many people played L.A. Noire here? How many people reloaded every time they got it wrong? See? Exactly. You don't want to be wrong. You don't want to be a crappy...
It's like 8 out of 8 correct.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be the crappy detective unless you're just, playing for...
Yeah, I think my
one.
hatred of sitting through cutscenes a second time is stronger than my desire.
Eventually, I didn't bother. When I realized it didn't matter, like they would always find a way to like get you to the right place. Eventually, even though maybe it wasn't as satisfying, which again goes back to what we were saying before. I should have the microphone.
It goes back to what we were saying before, as like there is like the headcanon way it's supposed to go, and it's obvious like when you screwed up, this wasn't how it was supposed to go, and so in an interrogation, if you get it right, you get a clue to go to a certain place, and if you got it wrong, suddenly there was a disturbance at that same place, and so you go, and it continues there, and it was again, like showing your work. It was very blatant what they were doing, and I didn't like it.
I think Eleanor is a really interesting example because mysteries are incredibly difficult to do in an effective branching way because there is a right answer. And I think one of the problems with offering branching choices is as soon as you have a right answer and some wrong answers, then as a designer it's very difficult to commit to the wrong answer, and you end up doing exactly what you're saying. There's the canon choice and there's the crappy choice that you really hope no one sees, and you telegraph the good one as much as you can. And there are ways to avoid that in cases where you don't want to go off the story. I mean, what we do a lot in 80 Days, or Meg did a lot when she was writing it, is just have, well, the next thing is going to happen, but how do you want the character to feel about it? So Passepartout will say, I was excited to board the airship, or I really hate flying. And it doesn't matter, so long as there are other choices and other things for the player to do. If you did that the whole time through, it might start to feel a bit, like you could just click through and it's pointless. But actually we found people enjoyed those choices much more than we were expecting. And I think the reason for that was that we clobbered people over the head with the fact that their choices could matter and that their choice of route around the globe was going to matter and that there were strategic elements early enough that people thought, oh, my choices matter. They had that frame of mind, and then when they came to these choices, they went, oh, maybe it matters. And I think that goes back to something I was going to say about the branching dialogue that you were talking about and kind of how you respond to people. That a neat trick might be just as simple as in your opening scenes, your opening one or two dialogues, make sure they branch in a really visible way. Like you say something nasty and the guard at the hotel says, screw you, I'm not going to talk to you anymore, and walks away. Or you say something nice and he goes, what, are you trying to flirt with me or something? And really escalate whatever direction the player chooses to say, look, well, you have definitely altered the route of this conversation clearly, visibly. Do that with your first three characters, and it doesn't matter what you do with the other ones, because you'll convince people that all your conversations are branching. Just you need to turn off the save reload feature, because it doesn't actually benefit anyone.
It's almost like a magic trick.
It is a magic trick.
Just
Fiction is a magic trick. When you go to the theatre and you genuinely believe that Macbeth is going to do something in his attempts, you know he's going to kill everybody, you know he's going to get clobbered at the end. It's a magic trick. But that's fine. The player has decided to play your game. They've made a contract with you. I think magic tricks are a really, really good example, actually, because they're all about suspension of disbelief in the audience. Right? We know things can't float, right? We know that, but we choose to be amazed by it anyway. How dumb is that? And then the magician leads you in a certain direction, and then, surprise, surprise, does something else. And you go, oh, I didn't see that coming, even though it's the same as every magic trick I've ever seen. But that's why we're there, that's why we're entertained. And maybe that's a completely different model than, like, games where, I don't know, like a puzzle-solving game, where you're solving puzzles. Maybe I don't want that to be a magic trick. Maybe that's much more like a chess match. It's me versus a machine, me taking control. Maybe they're just two different entertainments, I'm not sure. But, yeah. I mean, I played the third Blackmore game, and it doesn't branch, but it feels like it might have done. I felt like I was in control. And
It's a very minor branch at the very, very end.
Okay.
But it doesn't really affect anything.
But it sort of feels like an evolving plot, and that's kind of all I want as a player, really. I'm not really bothered about branches. I'm not going to reload it, but I was moving forward. I was having a time
Well,
with my characters.
But like Francisco was saying before,
Since we were doing episode games before it was cool, hipster, and we didn't really, using AGS, we didn't. I guess we could have. It just is kind of a pain in the butt to store that data, and because unlike Telltale and other companies that do this, I notice we do keep bringing up Telltale because they're really the only ones who do this in any significant way. So. Sorry, Telltale.
Well, a lot of people are copying the model. Like
Yeah, but no one's doing it like they are.
Yeah.
No one is.
But
Kind of, yeah, actually, yeah, that is interesting how they're doing it. But when Telltale makes their games, they can actually test the choices from a previous game to make sure they work in the second game before that first game even goes out, and that's really helpful. When I have like 3 years in between releases, I can't test these choices, the save data, because if it doesn't work, it's too late. There's nothing I can do. So I couldn't really make those branching choices in a 5-episode series because there was no way to establish which choice was canon. So if there ever was a branching choice, I think in the very first game you can, if you kind of dither or don't do the right thing, like the big ghost at the end, you don't save him and something horrible happens to him and then they express regret and that's the end of the game. Or you can figure out how to save him and they're happy. But in the following game, they don't talk about it in any way or form. It's just a very minor little thing.
Do you have a line of dialogue at the end where they say, let's agree not to talk about it?
I should have. They're like, well, this could have gone better. I should have. It's too late, but no, I didn't.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Oh.
Sorry, so we'll get to the questions. I just wanted to comment on, as far as like the mystery games, I'm really interested to see a detective game where it doesn't let you go there regardless, where, you know, because I mean, if you're actually investigating a crime in real life, not all crimes get solved. Why can't you play, I mean, it's frustrating to the player, obviously, because you're playing this game, you want to win. But I'd really like to see, like, where the option is, at the end, you can have the case go unsolved, or something like that. I haven't played the latest Sherlock Holmes game, the Frogware game, with Crimes and Punishments. But they've finally started apparently introducing the idea that you can convict the wrong person, or, you know. But that leads to one thing that I wanted to talk about too, that's a little off topic, but the idea of, like, in a game like that where you're playing Sherlock Holmes, who is the genius detective, you're given the option, it totally has to guide you, because you're Sherlock Holmes, you're gonna get it right, you have to get it right, otherwise you're not Sherlock Holmes. It's like, you know, I mean, in the Golden Wake, for example, I mean, you have the persuasion puzzles, and you're supposedly built up as this great real estate agent who can talk his way out of everything, but you can fail every single persuasion puzzle. So how good a real estate agent are you really if you just suck at your job, you know? So it's kind of, it creates that problem. So I just would be really intrigued to see a mystery game where if you miss a key piece of evidence, you can't solve the case.
This is actually something I'm thinking about. The game I'm working on is a mystery game, and it has this branching storylines. And you have those two characters, and basically how you can favor one of those characters, and then create advantages that turn into disadvantages for the other character. So you have to try to balance these storylines. And it's basically it's very linear in a way. You have all those decisions that still keep you on the right track, but in the end you have one finale, last act for the one character or for the other one. And I'm really dealing a lot with, I want the player to have very different information about the storyline of the last act. That you feel like you have a very different twist, and you feel like everything you did before feels a little bit different. And in order to do this, I have to conceal the other information you get in the other storyline. But I still want this to be a satisfying ending for everyone, because I know that I myself, I only play games once. I won't play a game twice, only if it's... I play the old games I grew up with when I was a child, I still play them today. But I want players who play through the one game and they favor the one character to say, okay, I have it was a satisfying ending, I know what this whole thing was about, I know who the murderer was, maybe it's wrong information I found out about, but to make it still satisfying by concealing information or by claiming that wrong information is real information, it gets very, very complicated, very, very quickly, and I go mad currently.
The issue with mystery games, getting maybe slightly off topic, but not quite, because it's dealing with multiple stories. I've done several mystery type stories, and there's like 3 stories that you have to create at the same time. There's what happened to cause the murder or the crime to occur. There's what's happened since then, and then there's what you do to solve the whole thing. And they're like 3 separate stories, and you only see one of them. So there's a lot of work that's being hidden under the hood, and that could get very, very complicated. Because as you're investigating, you're like, all right, what happened in the past that makes what you're doing now relevant? And once you find out what happened in the past, like what has happened since this crime occurred, and it can be very, very confusing. So, but if you really have it down, if you really know like what happened in the past, if you have that down really set in your head, then that sort of gives you a very solid foundation to kind of move through the present and like maybe try different ways of getting to the solution, because the foundation is there. You know what happened in the past, so that makes it a little bit easier. But that's the challenge of creating that foundation for yourself. You look like you have something to say.
I was just thinking about the mysteries where you can get things wrong and miss things out, and I sort of have 2 thoughts on that. And the first one is, question really, is a mystery game intrinsically a puzzle? Because if it is a puzzle, if you fail to solve a puzzle and you don't get another crack at it, that can be incredibly frustrating. Not because there's anything intrinsically wrong with getting stuff wrong. I think we should encourage that more in games, so we can get things wrong and move forward anyway. I think that's good for the soul. I think it's good for us as gamers. But if the contract of the game is this is a puzzle, you're going to be sort of thinking of it, it can be a bit upsetting if it turns out that wasn't the contract and actually you're going to lose something. The second thing is, if you look at Noir, it had quite a troubled development. It went through a couple of publishers. But if you remember the design of it, it has the main cases in a row, and then it also has the kind of incidental drive around the city, little incidents going on. And I don't know this for a fact, but I'm reasonably sure, looking at it, that the original structure of the game was you could do a case, you could fail it. If you failed it, they demoted you to a street cop, and you then had to walk around the street solving minor sort of skirmishes until you could earn enough points to get back into the detective desk and do the next case. And you never got to redo the case that you got wrong. I'm absolutely sure that was their structure, because otherwise the design of that doesn't make any sense at all. The open world in Noir is completely vacant of any purpose. But I think they had that, and I think there were early interviews where they said, you know, you can get cases wrong and it will affect his career path, and that isn't even slightly true in a release game. So it looks to me like that game, when it got given to Rockstar, they probably looked at it and said, your game is too random, your interviews are impossible to get right, people will feel that they're constantly being kicked in the head for something they didn't do, we cannot ship like that. Which is interesting, because I think actually Noir had a much more ballsy design than it eventually shipped with. And I don't think it would have worked as that game, because I think the interrogations are too random. But I think that's some of the reasons why it often shoehorns you into a successful plot. I suspect that's a late stage change rather than a fundamental design.
Well, I know one of the changes too that they made on LA Noir was the truth, doubt, and lie thing was originally, I think, Coke's or aggressive and lie or something, so that explains why he has those apparent mood swings. But I'm wondering if maybe the solution to making the player, or maybe if the solution or something to try is not make it so apparent that you've gone down the wrong path. Not just say, oh, well, no, you, like LA Noir does, you know, with the chime or whatever. And yeah, exactly. Because that's the thing, like I said before, you know, you want to do well. So if you know that you're going down the wrong path, you're going to want to instinctively reload and try again and try for the best thing. So maybe if it's not apparent that you're doing well or doing poorly, you're just going forward. That's the way to just kind of, you know, go. And then at the end, it tells you. Like, I think Star Trek Judgment Rights kind of did that in a way, because it was episodic within the game. You had each, you know, it kind of played out like a different episode of the original series. It gave you a score at the end, based on, you know, moral choices or whatever you made within the thing. But you didn't know while you were doing it what was right. I mean, there were obvious things, you know, Kirk could just scream at somebody or insult them or whatever, and sometimes that was the right choice to convince them. But it was how you handled the situation, I guess, concerning the Prime Directive or whatever, you know. But yeah, I mean, it's at the end, I guess, would be the best way to be like, oh yeah, well, you did all right, or you
That's
That's
actually
actually
I think what happened. I think, God, it's been so long since I played that, but at the end of the game they say, yeah, you know, did your little scores, you're going back to the academy now.
Yeah,
sorry.
exactly. And that's how you end the game. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, sorry,
Which,
Kirk.
that was actually kind of interesting. I know with going back to LA Noir, and to use another example, it's kind of this example is kind of lauded as this wonderful like poster child for wonderful choices done right in games, and I couldn't stand it. The Witcher 2 actually has like half the game is missed if you take a certain choice. If you side with one side over the other, you go like to a completely different place and interact with totally different people for several hours, and there's a whole nest load of content that you miss out on. And all of it's interesting. You know, I like The Witcher. I like The Witcher world and the characters and so on. But when I realized that, it kind of pissed me off, because I'm like, all right, in order to see everything, I have to play a significant chunk of the game over. You're deliberately wasting my time. And that's the same thing with LA Noir. Like, by the time you realize you're doing something, it's a long game. It's a long game, and to actually get it all correct takes a long time. And it's not fun knowing that, because I don't have the time to spend doing that. And so it's like when a game is deliberately wasting my time, that really upsets me.
Guys, sorry to interrupt. If you want to take some questions pretty soon, we'll wrap it up in a minute.
Okay.
We've got like a few minutes.
In other words, shut up, guys.
I think there was a question over there somewhere.
I was going to say, is it really even correct? I mean, I know it's unfortunate to say it when we've only got 2 minutes left, but is it even correct to say that Telltale and Quantic Dream are even doing branching narrative at all? Because I remember when I played Fahrenheit, I played Heavy Rain, I played some of the Walking Dead and one of the Wolf Among Us episodes. But it's not actually branching, it's just the illusion of branching, because there's no actual difference in how those stories progress. Like whether you choose, in The Walking Dead, whether you choose little Tommy, whatever he's called, or like the other dude, like they're both going to get chomped within the next 30 seconds, or killed by something, and everyone will still be angry with you. And I remember when I played the first Fahrenheit, it was the predecessor to Heavy Rain, I played through the game, I got to the credits, and there's some scenes I hadn't seen, and I thought, oh right, I'll start playing through the game, see if I can find those scenes. And I started making different choices to what I'd done the first game, absolutely no difference whatsoever. And I'm sure it's the same with Heavy Rain, and even David Cage himself has said, we don't really do branching, he calls it bending stories, which is his kind of bullshit term for saying, the illusion of choice, but not really.
I think branching narrative is not a very good name, certainly. The reason that it's used is it tries to describe the experience that the player is having. And I think the important thing isn't really whether the narrative actually branches. Because in the end, if we want people to have a nice time, they hopefully are not thinking about how the game is structured too hard. We want them to believe that what they're doing matters. That's probably all. So I quite like the bendy story model rather than the branching
It doesn't matter though,
model.
does it? That's what I'm saying, like, it doesn't matter, and
It matters.
I know it doesn't matter. It feels
I
dramatic, but
think it matters to the player if they've got nothing better to be thinking about, and that's a fundamental problem. The point at which players are going, well, I'm not really affecting this narrative, so why am I bothering? You have already lost your player at that point. That's already a fail. It's not a fail because your narrative didn't branch, it's a narrative because your game's so bloody boring. Everyone is only interested to see how it was built.
But doesn't that happen even if the game is like, the game narrative can be really strong, but doesn't that just happen when players might grow a brain cell and like just understand that what they're doing with the game is having no effect on it?
Why does having an effect important exactly?
Because we're talking about branching narrative. It's
But
not
no,
important.
but I
In
mean,
the context of
you
concept of
started
branching
with
narrative,
the
it is.
assumption that branching narrative is intrinsically something that people will want and we should be doing, and then when they find out that it's not branching narrative, they'll be disappointed. And what I'm saying is that there's nothing intrinsically interesting about branching narrative.
No, there isn't. But
It's a
there is-
marketing tag, but
No,
whatever.
but there is when people call it branching narrative and it isn't. That's my problem.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And then people will approach something and go, oh, apparently it's a branching narrative, oh no, it isn't, oh, I'm disappointed now.
But then
I
we're
thought
talking
it
about,
was-
so my point
So
is
what-
like, we talk about Telltale, but that's not really branching narrative.
No, but I think what it is a bunch of decisions that people attribute meaning to, which is very unusual in a game. Because generally in a game, it tells me to shoot some things, I shoot them, and move on. And so it manages to get some emotional empathy from a player, which is a massive achievement.
Yeah.
And if they do that through the mechanism of something that's called branching narrative, that's great. If they did it through the mechanism of something called the dancing frog, I wouldn't really care as long as it worked.
Just to say, I agree with you on Telltale, because I think the main mistake that they did when they started talking about The Walking Dead in the initial phases was they presented it as, the choices you make are going to be so important, people are going to die, if that person dies, they're going to be dead next episode. It made it seem like, well, by the time I get to episode 5, my game is going to be completely different than my friend's game because I made completely different choices, and it wasn't. It was just, okay, so-and-so died, but the story still took the same essential path, and I think that was the biggest mistake. Then they went back and they were like, and they put the disclaimer, this game is tailored to your choices, whatever. So your choices had an impact in a sense, but it wasn't that. But again, it just goes to the problem of having all these extra assets and having all this content that you're never going to see because you might not necessarily replay the game. So I guess it just all is in your advertising.
It's also some of their decision points actually in Telltale, like making it unbelievable. It's like, someone said, would you like a cup of tea? No. So-and-so will remember that. Why? Why did you want that?
I'm sure they had some of those. I'm sure they had some of those as a joke.
There's things like that as well,
One thing that's worth noting about Telltale as well is the structure of the Telltale game is actually the same as the structure of the Grand Theft Auto game. In the Grand Theft Auto, you quite often need to shoot someone, but you can swim there, or you can hide in a boat, or you can drive a car around, or you can wait to come over here and you pick them up. And quite a lot of missions in open world games are sufficiently open-ended. There's 4 or 5 ways to do it, and you can share with your friend how you chose to do it. And pretty much Telltale is exactly the same as that structure, which is quite interesting.
I think that means we're done. That is the shut up signal.
Thank you very
But
much,
thank
guys.
you.